All right, I think we are just about ready to go live. Welcome along. This is episode 2 of Behind the Screen. I'm James Lavers, the Dungeon Master and Dad for the Every 10-Day campaign that you can check out at every10day.com. Put in Every 10 Day into Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever, and we will crop up. Welcome along. So this being our second episode of Behind the Screen, you might wonder, like, what is this all about? This is a chance to get your questions answered about Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and specifically DMing, especially if you are a young adventurer. As the DM, I am also dad to my 2 players, which are my children, my daughter Charlotte, my son Finley, who play Danae and Elowen in our main campaign that you can check out here on our YouTube channel as well. We'd love to get your feedback on the campaign, what you like about it, what do you not like about it. But in DMing for my kids, oftentimes people have questions about that. Like, is that a little bit weird, letting your parent be your dungeon master as well? And you see, I was brought up as D&D being something that brought my family closer together. Specifically, me and my brother started playing in 1987 when I was 10 years old with the red box, the Dungeons & Dragons basic red box rule set. And for me, even though I went on to play it with my friends, it was always first something I did with family. And so when my son Finley got to be 10 years old, same age I was when I started playing Dungeons & Dragons, I thought, look, this is such a better way of bringing us together than just sitting around watching movies and playing video games all day. Although that's fun too, right? So this is a chance for you to get your questions answered. Listen, I'm not about to pretend. There are lots of channels out there right here on YouTube that will, show you Dungeons & Dragons being played by famous actors, by voice actors, by, other people, usually in America, right? Play it with their friends a lot. Here on our channel, which you can subscribe to anytime you want, there's probably a button somewhere, right? Somewhere, look around, there'll be a button. But our channel is specifically, if you're a young adventurer, that means you're a young person, a teenager or not quite pre-teen, and you're looking to start playing Dungeons & Dragons, or you're watching this and you're a parent, and you actually want to do something with your kids that's feels a little bit more worthwhile, right? It feels a little bit more bonding for you as a family than just sitting around yelling at each other and watching movies. D&D, it's the thing to do. So what this is all about, these behind the screen sessions, is a chance for you to ask questions, get your questions answered about Dungeons & Dragons. So on session 1 of Behind the Screen that we had last week, we answered sessions about storytelling, about how to integrate different rule sets of Dungeons & Dragons. When I started playing with my kids, we were actually using 2nd edition rules until I figured out that they'd published a 5th edition. And then I was like, we're going to change. So we moved across. Today, we're going to answer some questions. I've got my mobile phone here with some of the questions that we're going to be digging into. So we're going to look at character building. Now, I'm not going to look at character building. I'm not going to walk you through character building the way it's done in a million videos here, which is always like, hey, roll 4d6, take the lowest and assign that to your stats and build the character and race and class that you want. There's a lot of videos about that. I'm going to look at character building, introducing something called the Ocean Personality Test. If you're thinking, what is this, Jay? Is it a personality test for Dungeons & Dragons? Stay with me. I think you're going to like this little twist on character development that I think will help you bring your characters to life. Even if you're not an actor, if you're not a voice actor, if you're not like one of those kind of ostentatious people, even if you're sort of a bit more reserved in your role play, I think this will really help you build a more complex and fully rounded character. So stay tuned for that. We're also going to be looking at session 0. It's a big one, and it's one that we talked about briefly on last week's session, but I'm going to go a bit more into session 0 and really what it's about. It's also your chance, if you're watching me live, to ask questions, right? If you ask your questions now while we're live, I'll answer. I promise to answer them here while we're live for as long as we're live. If you ask questions after we're live, when the live stops, I will still answer them, but it'll be in text, right? So I'll answer your questions in text. But don't be shy. The only stupid question is the one you don't ask because you're like, no, I don't want to ask that. I'll hold on to it. No, if there's anything you want to ask me about Dungeons & Dragons, DMing, I've been doing it since I was 10 years old. Playing, that is. I started DMing when I was about 15 years old. So it's a long time, 30 years plus. I know the screen obviously shaves off the wrinkles, and the pointy ears distracts you from the ravages of time. But let's get into it. We're also going to be answering some questions. Principally, the questions we're going to be answering are from our Discord followers. So if you go to discord.every10day.com, discord.every10day.com, you'll be able to join our Discord, ask questions there. I always ask questions from our Discorders first. Really that simple. So Jay Nuke in our Discord also asked last week for us to go into a little bit more depth about the mechanics of how I integrate the rule sets. Now, I started to answer this last week, but it's a pretty complex one. So we're going to revisit again. How do you integrate, like if you've got like, oh, I like that rule from 2nd edition. I like that rule from 3rd edition or 1st edition. How do I bring it all in? We're going to talk a little bit about that. And we've also talking about like how to play from beginning to advanced. So if you're just new to Dungeons & Dragons and you're wanting to play from beginning to all the way up to advanced, like how do you get started with this thing? I think, and I don't think I'm alone in this one, a lot of people, whilst it's wonderful seeing all of the famous people and the high production values of some of the great content producers out there for Dungeons & Dragons right now, some of it can be a little bit intimidating because many of the times the people playing on camera have proficiency, they have skill, they have comfort being on camera. And so they are performing as much as they are playing. And many people, therefore, are intimidated by the kind of the slickness and the flow of play. And, I'm going to give you kind of like the real truth about what it's like to play. And if you want to stream your game, what that's like, if things get a little bit clunky and a little bit weird with your players. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Say hi. For God's sake, in the comments, say hello. So I know if you're watching us live, and if you want to ask any questions, think them up. Just sit there and go, that's something I'd like to know about Dungeons & Dragons. Encounter building, storytelling, world building, what to do with problem players, how do you keep the players engaged? All of these kind of things are the kind of topics certainly that I'm interested in. And I love answering questions about Dungeons & Dragons. If I don't know the answer, but I know somebody who does, I'll let you know who to check out. Sound fair enough? All right, well, let's get into it then. By the way, thanks for those of you that were worrying about me last week. I had a cap on and I had a bandaged head because I had like a lump removed from my head right here. You don't want to know these details, do you? Right here. The ear kind of hides it. But I had a lump removed from here and it was bleeding all day. It was crazy. It's just blood everywhere. And so I bandaged my head up and I did the video and it was still bleeding. It was still bleeding. It was crazy. Anyway, don't DM with a bleeding head. That's my big main tip. All right, we're going to start with character building. And I want to introduce an idea of how you build a character. Firstly, what I would say is when you're building a character, follow the rules, right? So the rules say very clearly, take 46, roll them, take away the lowest, and do that 6 times, right? And then you'll have 6 ability scores that you can assign to strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, right? So you're kind of your external, your big 3 external, how strong you are, how healthy you are, how dexterous and lithe and nimble you are, versus how smart, how wise, and how charismatic you are. So you've got the kind of like the inner game qualities and the outer game qualities of your character. You get to assign those numbers where you like, and then decide what kind of job you want your character to do. By job, I just mean class, which basically is just a job, like a warrior, a fighter, they are a paladin, or like a holy fighter. They are a wizard, or they are a bard, or they are a barbarian, or they are a monk, etc., 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 right? Now, all of that is explained really well in the rules. You don't need a video from me to tell you how to do that. Seriously, just grab yourself a player's handbook, ding, or grab yourself a starter set, bing, and do it, right? Get going. It kind of walks you through how to do that real quick, real easy. You also get to choose at that point whether you want to what race you want to be, right? So do you want to be an elf? Do you want to be a dwarf? Do you want to be a halfling? Do you want to be a tiefling? Do you want to be a dragonborn? Do you want to, like, what do you want to be? You want to be a human? You want to be a half race, right? You want to be a half elf, half dwarf, half whatever. All right, it's got the rule sets for all that. Actually, there isn't a rule set for half dwarf, is there? Let's have one. So, so that's all pretty easy. You can find that out in the rule books that are freely available. In fact, you can still get Dungeons and Dragons' kind of basic rule set free online. And in fact, if you visit every10day.com, our website, there's a link where you can download those basic rules. It doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to put in any information like your name and email address or any of that stuff. You can get those details for free. You can get that information for free that will enable you to create a character. Except you won't be creating a character. This is the thing. What is a character? I mean, in everyday life, you know, in the real world, when we talk about a character, oh, that person's a real character, usually means there is something remarkable about their personality, right? There is something of remark. There is something that makes you go, that's a kind of a person of interest, right? That's a remarkable person. It could be they're quirky. It could be that they're moody. It could be that they're whatever it might be, slightly neurotic and paranoid. Or it could be they're completely overly ostentatious, and so many more. I find that if you actually want to create a character and not just, you know, roll up and label all the bits that make a D&D character a character, if you actually want to make a real character that will be remembered, you've got to dig a bit deeper. And there's nothing really in the rule sets for that. Now, granted, in 5th edition, and this was different from 2nd edition, in 5th edition, we had backgrounds. And so in backgrounds, you can now roll a dice and get different kind of quirks of personality with things like bonds and traits and flaws. You can kind of start to flesh out your character. I'm not a huge fan. Not a huge fan of that. I've got to be honest. And here's why. I think it limits your character way too early. I think one of the ways that you build and establish your character isn't by deciding it all up front, but by having your character react with the world and interact with the world and the people within it. And I think you kind of find your character. I really do. And that's one of my challenges with bonds and flaws and all those kind of things is in 5th edition is it ties your character in real early. And you may start to discover things about your character only by the way they interact and react to the world. Now, bear in mind, I was raised by actors. Hey, mom and dad, if you're watching this, I was raised by actors. And, you know, one of the things they say is acting is reacting. And so I find that you will often discover things about your character by having them react. Reminds me of a point in our main campaign. It's the main campaign that you can watch here on YouTube. If you go to our playlists, we've got our main campaign. We only started streaming it on YouTube from episode 100 onwards. So if you want to check out the actual podcast, just go to podcast.every10day.com or just go to Apple Podcasts and put in every 10 day or just D&D and you'll find us. And early on in the campaign, there's a point where Danae and Elwyn, played by my daughter and son respectively, they actually interact with some of the local law, basically these white claw military enforcers. They start to interact with them. And it was only by interacting and predominantly reacting to these non-player characters that I put in their way that they started to sort of get character. I remember the day that the military enforcers are basically spelling out that Elwyn, my son's wizard character, has to hand in his spell book, you know, and is forced into doing military service. That my daughter, Charlotte, who plays Danae, just kind of spurted out. She went, well, this is preposterous. we thought that was hilarious. Preposterous? Who even uses the word preposterous? We thought the word preposterous was preposterous, but it all came out. And it was one of the first sparks of real character that we saw coming out. So I find, don't be in too much of a hurry to detail your entire character and the character of your character, because a lot of that will come out in gameplay. But as promised, I want to take you through a personality profile, or a personality, let's say, a way of categorizing personality that is actually used in the scientific community. I've got it written down here in front of me, and I'm going to read out what it says here. It's fondly known as the Big Five personality traits, or OCEAN, OCEAN. It's an acronym, right? And they're incredibly helpful personality traits for understanding yourself. And when you understand your own personality, in fact, let me just go back. Researchers have found that there is science to personality. Every single person, get this, every single person, regardless of gender, age, nationality, whatever, is made up of 5 basic traits: your openness, your conscientiousness, your extroversion, your agreeableness, and your neuroticism. Now, some of those will be pretty obvious to you. Others there, you might be going, what on earth is that? These are actually the 5 traits that are scientifically verified as being measurable in every human being. Like we can measure these things. They're also hereditary. So we pass them on. If I am very high in agreeableness, for example, if I've got very high agreeableness, which I don't, but if I did, that's actually a trait that I can pass on to my kids to some extent. And likewise, it could be something that I will inherit to a certain extent as well. So I'm going to kind of walk you through what each of these traits is all about. And again, I'm just reading from a website here, thescienceofpeople.com. So thank you, scienceofpeople.com. Openness, right? Openness is when someone is curious and open-minded to new experiences, and knowledge. People who rate high in openness are inventive and curious. People who rate low in openness are consistent and cautious. So do you agree or disagree with these statements? I love adventure. Right? I am imaginative. I am the first to try new activities. If you agreed, then you probably rate high in agreeableness. Then you probably rank high in openness. Have a think with your character that you're making, your D&D character. How open are they? How open is your character? And I'd always say, give it a score from, like, say, 0 to 5 is always a good one. 0 to 5 or 0 to 10, right? 0 is important, right? 0 is important because it means complete lack of. Okay, so if you think about your D&D character, and instead of thinking what their background is and tying them all in to these bonds and traits and flaws and all this kind of thing, think, how open is my character? Before you ever think about alignment, whether they're lawful good, lawful evil, lawful neutral, neutral good, neutral evil, chaotic good, chaotic neutral. Before you even start to think about that, think, how open is my character? How open are they? And so you might ask of yourself, you've got your character here, and you say, are they very high in curiosity? Are they very high in inventiveness? Are they open-minded to new experiences, or are they more consistent and cautious? If your character is more consistent and cautious, they might be quite low in openness. You might put like a 0 or a 1 or a 2 there. All right, these are just some extra ideas to help you actually build character. And hey to Dressur, who's joined us, who says, how do you encourage the Shire players around the table to open up and embrace the character building in D&D? I've experienced a couple of people who would really struggle to disconnect themselves. Great. I'm going to answer that question next once we finish this ocean little bit here. So then the second personality trait is conscientiousness. Remember, it goes by the acronym OCEAN, OCEAN. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Again, these are just nice little extras that you won't find in any of the rule books or probably anywhere, but it's certainly something I consider when I'm thinking about, as the DM, when I'm thinking about my non-player characters. And it's also something that I encourage my players to think about with their characters. And I think it's this that really, really gives your character character. You know, it's not how charismatic, intelligent, or wise they are that makes character. It's how they interact and react to the world that does. And these traits will help you define that with way greater clarity. How conscientious are they? So conscientiousness describes how organized and dependable you are. People who rate high in conscientiousness are often efficient and organized. People who rate low in conscientiousness are more easygoing and laid back. Do you agree or disagree with these statements? I am highly self-disciplined. I'm very organized and always come prepared. I like to know the plan rather than be spontaneous. So if you agreed, you probably rate high in conscientiousness. If you disagreed, you probably rate low on conscientiousness. It's something you consider with your character. You can say of your character, are they organized and dependable, or are they a little bit more easygoing and laid back? My character from when I was 10 years old, Nimblefoot, is quite low in conscientiousness, much more laid back, even to the point of mischievousness, and kind of like he will he will probably defy somebody else's efforts to try and get him organized and those kind of things. But in openness, he's very, very high in openness, very curious, very inventive and inquisitive. So that's conscientiousness. Trait 3 is extroversion. Extroversion describes how you interact with people, with other people. Remember, all of these are separate from your alignment, and it will really help your character become a real character. People who rate high in extroversion are outgoing and energetic. People who rate low in extroversion are more solitary and often reserved. So do you agree or disagree with these statements? I am the life of the party. I don't mind being the center of attention. I'm usually the one to start a conversation with someone. Well, if you agree with that, or if your character agrees with that, they're going to be quite high in extroversion. If they disagree, they're going to be lower in extroversion. And I would invite you, if you're creating your D&D character, to maybe give each of these traits a score from something like 0 to 5, or even 1 to 5. But I think the 0 is important if you want to have a character that's completely extreme in one of these particular traits. The fourth one is agreeableness. So agreeableness is how you feel towards others. People who rate high in agreeableness are friendly and compassionate. People who rate low in agreeableness are more analytical and detached. So do you agree or disagree with these statements? I tend to trust people and give them the benefit of the doubt. This doesn't sound like any D&D character ever. I'm extremely empathetic. I like to make other people feel at ease. If you agreed, then you probably rate high in agreeableness. If you disagreed, you probably rate lower in agreeableness. And then the fifth trait is neuroticism. Neuroticism is how you deal, or in the case of your D&D character, how your D&D character deals with emotion. How do they deal with emotion? So people who rate high in neuroticism are sensitive and tend to be more nervous. People who rate low in neuroticism tend to be more secure and more stable. So do you agree or disagree with these statements? I stress out easily. I tend to be moody. I am a worrier. If you agreed, then you're probably high in neuroticism, or your D&D character is probably high in neuroticism. If you disagreed, your character is going to be lower in neuroticism. And again, you can do this for yourself as well. And there's tests online you can do if you fancy it in the real world to find out your ocean score. I find that if you start to give those 5 traits some serious thought for your D&D character, you'll actually start to flesh out a character that can interact with the world and react to the world in a much more nuanced way than just the limits of background, bond, flaw, and all those kind of traits that are in the 5th edition, which are okay, I guess, but I find can be quite one-dimensional when applied to a D&D character. Your character's got a lot more going on and will be interacting with people and situations, plus their party members, throughout a game. And you know what? You're going to want to have some continuity in that interaction and that reaction. And I find that these big 5 traits will really help that come alive. So that's that question answer for today, and something really just to help you add a bit more flavor to your Dungeons and Dragons character building. Remember, this is on top of the typical rolling 4d6 6 times to get the 3 outward physical scores and the 3 inner kind of mental emotional scores of that define your character, but don't really give your character any character. These 5 personality traits will. All right, so the question that came through from Dresseur, thanks for that, Dresseur, was how do you encourage the Shire players around the table to open up and embrace the character building in D&D? I've experienced a couple of people who would really struggle to disconnect themselves from the real world, right? Like to actually get into it. I think there's a lot of things we can do. Starting with set the mood, right? Just like in other areas of life, and those of you that are adult, maybe you don't get that much time with your loved one if you have one, right? So if you've got a loved one or a partner or a husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, or somebody with whom you share an intimate relationship, you'll know that it's very important at key times to set the mood, right? If you've had a hard day at work, the pair of you, and then you get home and you want to kind of like really connect and hear about each other's day, you got to set the mood. It's the same with Dungeons and Dragons, right? You've got to, for the game, you've got to set the mood. This is so important. And I remember back to my games with my brother. I said this in last week's episode, actually, so you can go back and watch that one. One of the things that my brother did, he was a very cinematic dungeon master. And so what this meant was that he would go to great pains to make sure he had the right music playing. Now, this was in the late 80s, 1987 we started. CDs were a new thing. So he would put on one of these CDs of a film score, like Dances with Wolves, that kind of thing. Or some of these 80s films. There's a film with Michael Douglas called Black Rain, I think. And in it, there's a great bit of music in the score. Most of it's a little bit cheesy, but there's a great bit of music that he would play to really encapsulate the music of the Eastern realm of Categorizing. And there was some music as well in the Karate Kid. Especially the second Karate Kid, where Daniel-san and Mr. Miyagi are doing some kata over a mountaintop, a cliff top. Now, this is my memory really working hard here. And there's a bit of music that goes to that he would play as well before the game. And what it did was it got me out of being a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old kid, and it got me into the world, right? There's a reason why films have music, right? Is it helps immerse us in the experience emotionally. So I think number 1 is you've got to set the mood. Number 2, transition. So usually before a game and after a game, you're going to be doing other things, right? Make sure that you have time to transition between whatever you were doing before you start playing D&D and then the D&D game, and then afterwards. Always allow yourself transition time. I'll tell you where I've screwed this up before as well. And if you get this right, it means people will be more immersed in the game, even if they're a bit shyer, or oftentimes it's not just shyness. Oftentimes it's just, it doesn't come natural to immerse yourself emotionally in the world for everybody. It just doesn't. But if you leave yourself transition time, it'll help. Now, when my children are with me, they don't live with me. I see them every 10 days. So 10 days goes by, and then I have them for 4 days, a long weekend, and then 10 days with their mother, and then 4 days with me. It's why we name the campaign the way we do, but it's also because a 10-day is a unit of time in the Forgotten Realms in Dungeons and Dragons. So it's kind of a cute double meaning, right? But on a Sunday, I need to get them back to their mum. If I don't leave enough time at the end of a game, if we sometimes play on a Sunday, if I leave too little time between when I think the game will wrap up and when we've got to get in the car with all their bags and all their stuff and get back to their mum, I'm going to be thinking about that as we start playing. Immersion is lost. You might even be able to spot it in some of our episodes if you listen real closely, if you listen for it. It might be where I'm a little shorter and I'm a little bit more irritated. And then what I find is they are feeling that as well. And so it's immersion isn't as deep as I would like it. It's why we tend to play or either on a Friday night or on a Saturday, because then we know we haven't got to be getting in the car and doing a 3-hour journey, Likewise, beforehand, what I found is if we're doing like too much video games before we play D&D, when we come to D&D, what I find, especially with Finley, I'm sure you wouldn't mind kind of admitting and maybe talking to this a little bit, is if their mind has been too much on a task in a video game, they'll bring that to the table, right? Especially if there's no break. If it's sort of like 20 minutes before, the end of a couple of hours of playing video games and then playing Dungeons and Dragons, they're not quite here. They're not quite in the game, I find. So I find having the right amount of transition time either side of the game is vital. Nowhere will anyone tell you that. They'll always say, well, at the beginning of the game, set the scene. And I'm like, well, actually, what you're doing in the hour before the game and what you plan to be doing in the hour after the game will massively influence the game itself. If you're going out, or you got to get the kids off somewhere, or if you're playing even with your friends, someone's got an appointment or a date or whatever it might be, check in with everyone. Like, is there some leeway either side? We're playing a new campaign with Charlotte and Finley and one of Charlotte's best friends, Maddie, and we may even start streaming that. We're still talking about that. And one of the things that Charlotte told me is, she said, Maddie's got to get to work for 6 p.m. And I remember when we started playing, I was like, I'm not sure I want that tension in the air when we're at the table playing D&D. Even if we're all into the game, it'll still be there in the background. So the other thing you want to do is try and minimize those kind of threads of attention that are going elsewhere while you're playing. And when it comes to shyness, oftentimes shyness, in my experience, as someone who has suffered from terrible blushing myself when I was a teenager, like crippling blushing and shyness. And I'm still actually quite introverted as an adult. I mean, I'm here on camera because my job outside of playing Dungeons and Dragons with my kids is running an online training company. But part of the reason I like it is because it's just me and a camera, and I'm okay with relating to that. But actually, I'm pretty shy. And so this is an easy one for me. What I tend to find is shyness is enhanced when people go inside themselves. So in order to become shy, oftentimes you have to make what I call like a mind movie. You have to go inside and imagine certain things happening, and those things sort of make you pull back because you might make certain scenarios. I used to, for example, when I was at school as a teenager, I used to, at the beginning of the day, make all these movies in my mind about how the day was going to go and how it was going to be horrible and how I was going to blush. And it would make me shy ahead of time. So what I find is anything you can do to get shy people out of themselves and focused on the outside is really, really helpful. What a shy person might do is they might think about their character and how they're going to express their character. And they might go in and start making movies about how that might go wrong, or it might be stupid, or people might laugh and those kind of things. And what I always think is you want to speak to those people outside of the game and just make it okay. Just say, listen, what in particular are you worried might happen? That's always a good question. Like, what are you worried might happen with this game, right? And if you shut the hell up and listen, it's amazing what your players may actually tell you. And I find that question is nice because it's not too confrontational. It's not like, well, hey, is there any way we can help you not be shy? Like, that's way too confrontational. If you say, hey, listen, what are you worried might happen with this game or with this session, or what are you worried might happen? And if you've got a good rapport with your players, especially if you're a parent and you're cool with your kids, you get on well with your kids, you can say, what are you worried that might happen? And if they're like, I don't want to do a voice, I don't want to do a funny voice and sound stupid, you just go, okay, cool, don't do a voice then. Don't do a voice. One of the things I find with shy people is we want to try and make it safe, right? You want to make the environment safe. And I always think, have as few surprises as possible. Probably a shy player is worried that they're going to be put on the spot. Now, out of Finley and Charlotte in our games, I would say Finley tends to be slightly more shyer than Charlotte. And a few times that I've just put him on the spot and had a character speak directly to him, oftentimes there's a little moment where he goes, oh. And I find I try and minimize those as much as I possibly can. So with shy players, don't put them on the spot in the same way that you might a more extroverted, outgoing, and open character. again, this is where the Big Five personality test comes in quite good for your players, not just your characters, but your players. If you know, for example, that you've got a player at the table who is a little bit more introverted, who has lower extroversion and lower openness, then that's not a player that I'm going to surprise with having an NPC surprisingly interact with them. I'm probably going to pick another one, and I'm going to encourage my more extroverted players to involve the more introverted Shire characters. Does that make sense? So really, the quick answer is, not just, you've heard the term, the ancient Greek idea of know thyself, but know thy players. Know the people that you have around the table. This is where session 0 is so important. So I said we'd talk a little bit about session 0. Session 0 to me isn't just a chance from me, the DM, to establish the rules of my campaign that everyone will obey. You know, this is how it's going to work. This is what's real in my world. This is what's not real. I want you to abide by these rules. It's actually just a chance for me to see how the players interact. Who's the quiet one? Who's the more nervous person? You know, and what we can do, as I've just done in our more recent campaign, not our main campaign that's here on YouTube, is I made the session 0 the kind of part 1, like chapter 1 of the campaign. Just introducing the characters gently, asking them to describe themselves, and making it very clear around the table that we kind of weren't playing D&D yet. We were playing D&D, but what I was doing is I was just setting the scene and talking about Middenfirth, this town that they were in, and it's all based on a bridge. I got this from a wonderful Patreon that we support, who is called, I want to give a shout out to our Patreon that we love. It is my memberships. Here we are. Borough Bound. It was a wonderful Patreon account, and what they do is they publish places, you know, like towns that are fully fleshed out for you to just use in your game. I love it. Borough Bound. Hey, Borough Bound, if you ever watch this, we love you. Thank you very much. And so what I did in session 0 is I just introduced the town, and I just very slowly and gently introduced the kind of the day-to-day for our 3, in this case, 3 players, what they were doing. Gave them an opportunity to introduce themselves. And that's when you'll usually get an idea of the openness and the extroversion of your players. You know, the person who kind of rushes and just says, oh yeah, here's so-and-so, they're a half elf, long dark hair, white skin. And if they stop like that and they're done, then you know they're done. Okay, that's fine. They're kind of maybe feeling a little shy that day, but you can find out. And session 0 gives you a chance to see how quickly do they open up. I'm not interested in defining my players by fixed entities, like they are introverted and closed off. What I'm interested in really doing is seeing how quickly they adapt, because that's way more important than a fixed thing. Are they shy or are they not shy? You know, I don't really care about my characters or my players, in that way. Are they shy or are they open? Are they willing to use silly voices, or are they, wanting to just not role play like that? What I'm interested in is how quickly can they adapt in the right environment? Because the D&D gaming environment is a unique one to any other game out there, right? Any other non-tabletop role-playing game out there. In as much as you don't do it in video games, you don't really do it watching movies or anything else that you might do with your friends or your family. And so what I'm interested in is when we come into this world, how quickly do you get it and change? That's what I'm looking to see. And so I'm going to give you a final tip. Many, many years ago, I trained to be a hypnotist. Now, when you are learning, and actually more specifically a hypnotherapist, now it's not something I practice professionally, and I haven't done any for a long time, but there's a principle in hypnosis that's all about going there first. The best hypnotists are often those people who can put themselves into a trance and go into a trance-like state themselves. So here's my final tip about immersion and especially immersing your players in the world that you're creating and the scenes that you are setting for them and the interactions and the encounters that you are sprinkling in their paths. Here's my biggest tip. The more you immerse, the more you will find your players will immerse. And what I tend to find, and my typical answer now to what do I do with a shy player, is I say this: go there first. Go there deeper yourself. Don't worry about your players. The bottom line is this: at the end of the day, you can't really do anything about a shy player, without taking, a long time to talk to them and encourage them. And then it stops really being a game. If you're having to do a big coaching session before or after each game, then it's not really a game anymore. Right now, it's something else. What I tend to find is this: if in doubt, go deeper yourself. So if you are having trouble with the immersion with your players, you get more immersed as the dungeon master. Go there deeper yourself. And what you'll tend to find is your players will follow. I find this sometimes when, when I've been, there was a time when I was really trying to work out what Nimblefoot, my character's accent was. And I was worrying about it. And my kids will laugh at me for this, because at one point he was just spoke like me, just spoke like this. And then I put his voice up a little bit. So he spoke like me, but he spoke a little bit higher. And then I was like, no, I think he's American. So I gave him an American accent. So I was like, oh yeah, Nimblefoot's like this, and he speaks like this all the time, And then I was like, no, I don't like that. I'm going to go back to just talking normally. And then I was like, this is no different than my DM voice. And what I found was, the more I tried to get his voice right, the more I came out of immersion myself. And so the whole mood of the game was altered by that. And everybody else came out of it as well, right? And so if you want more immersion from your players, regardless of whether they're shy, extroverted, open, closed, whatever it might be, is as Dungeon Master, go there yourself. Go there deeper yourself, and you will tend to find everyone else will follow. It's almost like its own gravity. The more immersive gravity you create, the more you get into your world. Just like a good hypnotherapist doesn't just sit there and go, right, you ready to go into a trance? Okay, 3, 2, 1, bam, you're under. Let's go deeper and deeper. Relax. A great hypnotherapist, as I was taught many, many years ago, actually starts to put themselves into a type of trance in which people will follow. And the more you relax, the more the person in front of you relaxes. And so it's the same with immersion in your game. So if you want people to be immersed in your world that you're creating, you get immersed in it. You start to be there yourself. You start to become into the world. And the more you go into this world, the more your players will follow. Creates an amazing kind of gravity that everyone else can get on board. All right. So I don't think we've got any more questions in the chat. If you do have any more questions, if you're watching live, if you've dropped in, I've seen a couple of times we've had a few people watching live. Now's the time to put your question in the box. Otherwise, I'll answer it in text afterwards, or we'll put it for next week. But either way, I hope you've enjoyed this episode about character building and immersion and session 0 and how to deal with and how to really work with and how to play with. That's probably a better word, isn't it? How to play with players who maybe are a little bit shy and less likely to get connected to it. I hope you found this helpful. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like it. We don't have a massive following. We're not a big American LA company with masses of sponsors, and we're not voice actors or anything like that. And so every single like matters. Every single comment matters. Whereas I suppose when you get big, the difference between having 100,000 likes and 100,001 likes is really insignificant for us. A single extra like makes all the difference. A single extra comment makes all the difference and helps us to reach more of the families and young adventurers and individuals like us who want to get better at this game and have more fun and have more connection through Dungeons and Dragons. So please take the time to like, comment, even share it if you think somebody else would find it helpful. If you are going to share it, let people know why you're sharing it, because I always think they may not know us and even care about us, but they probably do know you. And so let them know why you're sharing it. That'll make all the difference. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you on Behind the Screen, episode 3 of our Q&A, probably this time next week. Thinking of doing these weekly. Let your friends know about it. And yeah, we'll speak to you really, really soon. Big love. Bye for now.